Today, some 40 days after the birth of Jesus, Mary and Joseph take their tiny infant son, present him in the temple, and then put him into the arms of Simeon. Let's go back just a bit further to the arms that first held the newborn Christ child. I think of Mary in those first few days after the birth of her Jesus, and how after everything she'd been through, how it must have meant everything to get to hold the Christ child in her arms. Can't you just picture her? Mary holding her baby, perhaps sometimes in silence, sometimes laughing, sometimes making little faces, sometimes crying, smelling the top of his head, sometimes maybe with eyes closed, just rocking him back and forth, and loving him with more love than she realized she had inside of her. The scriptures tell us of some visitors to that place of the birth of Jesus, right? How surprised Mary must have been when, sometime later, a group of shepherds nervously bumbles their way into the stable. Now, shepherds were among the lowliest class, dirty, smelly, and noisy. And they find their way to the baby, and Mary, like every mother of their firstborn child, must have been so protective of her infant. Yet I imagine this, that in those shepherds, Mary sees something of herself. And in the power of that moment, something stirs in her, and she decides to share her priceless treasure with them for a moment. I can see Mary looking lovingly and knowingly at them and saying, "Would you like to hold him? Would you like to hold the baby?" And one at a time, I picture those lowly shepherds nervously reach out and hold the newborn Christ child. And as they do so, they grow quiet. The quiet that comes over us when we hold the child. They hold them close, and their world would never be the same. How could it be? These poor and humble shepherds hold the newborn baby, and for a moment, these shepherds feel like kings. The shepherds feel like kings. And they would forever remember that night. And the young mother that asked, "Would you like to hold him? Would you like to hold the baby Jesus?" Later, there would be other visitors. This time it was kings who make their way to the stable. And something stirs in Mary again. And she sees a bit of herself in them, perhaps as well. And to these kings, Mary offers the same gift she offered the shepherds. Would you like to hold him? Would you like to hold the baby? And the kings hold this child. And for a moment, they forget that they're kings. Titles and thrones mean nothing when you hold an infant. And this night, these kings fall to their knees like humble shepherds. And now it would be Simeon's turn to hold this child in this temple, as he was so often, hoping against hope, waiting for the promised Messiah. Today, Mary puts her infant son in Simeon's arms. Would you like to hold him? Would you like to hold the baby? And Simeon, this older man with his child in her arms, now says that he has everything he needs now that it's okay to die. He says, now, Lord, you can let your servant go in peace. My own eyes have seen the child. My own arms have held him. I held him in my arms. You know, once I got to hold the baby, as part of a 30-day retreat, I was to use my imagination to picture myself at that scene as like an observer, watching Mary and Joseph and their newborn in Bethlehem. And as I was imagining this, and I did not expect this, at one point, Mary turns to me and says, would you like to hold him? Would you like to hold the baby? And I was so moved, I started to cry. I can obviously go back there pretty easily. And when I held that infant Jesus, I don't think I talked to him, I just remember kind of rocking him in my arms a bit, and sometimes I would just look at him, and mostly I just cried. And in my imagination, I held the infant child, and I just loved him. This baby who makes shepherds feel like kings, and kings fall to their knees like shepherds. So I thought maybe for a moment, I would invite you to use your imaginations for just a bit as well. It'll be your turn, right? I'm going to invite you, if you would, to put yourself in that same scene in Bethlehem, in your own way, right? And if it works for you, to just kind of imagine yourself being there. So if you would, maybe just take a few good breaths now. And I always think it's, good to maybe breathe in through our nose and out through our mouths and become aware of having a body, become aware of being alive, become aware of being you. And if you can, picture yourself there for just a moment, right? You notice what it smells like. Perhaps there are some sounds, maybe an animal rustling or chewing. And you see Mary holding that infant. And as you watch, what's she doing in that moment, right? And what's that moment like? And then Mary looks up at you and says, would you like to hold him? Would you like to hold the baby? Could you let yourself take that child? And if you can, let yourself feel what that feels like. What's it like, that weight of that infant in your arms? Can you smell the top of that child's head maybe? Maybe you rock. Is there something you would want to say to the infant Jesus? Well, if so, maybe go ahead and say it, huh? And soon it will be yours to give the infant back, so just savor that for just a moment more. And as you put the child back into Mary's arms, what's inside of you as you do so? I know that some people use imagination more readily than others, and if you found any blessing in that, I'm glad. And if that was difficult, or you fell asleep, or just hard to imagine, it's okay. It's still true. God has indeed given each of us Jesus to hold. Each of us holds this gift, not in our arms. We hold him in our hearts. we hold him in our entire being. And maybe you're someone who finds it hard to believe that you would be good enough, that you would be worthy, that God would want you to hold Jesus. Well, today you can feel like a king. You could feel like a king, for God believes that you are worthy to hold Jesus in you. Or maybe your temptation is to think that, yes, me, but maybe not others, right? They're not worthy. And if so, when you realize that you hold the Christ child in you, but not only you, that each person does, may it bring you humbly to your knees like the shepherds. For through the miracle of God taking flesh in humanity, God pleads with us. Can you now see that each person is precious to me? How I have entrusted my child in each of you. Therefore, there's no reason for fear, for hate of each other. My child is in you, and may the child in you recognize the child in every person, right? And children, my children gay or straight, black or white, my children fleeing their homelands for the safety of their families, and every person all over the world. So, my friends, if you are someone whose imagination helps you, you might from time to time just stop a moment, step back inside of yourself to wake up just a tiny bit to that moment. Wherever you are, just become aware of being there. Because in that moment of inner silence, if you or I listen hard enough, we might just hear God who whispers quietly, you do hold him. You do hold